Hi everyone, I'm Kieran Taylor,
I'm Martin Welsh.
and welcome to another episode of Those Pension Guys. So it is just myself and Martin today, and we are going to be tackling all things budget. So it probably gives us a good chance to talk about this, doesn't it, Martin? That when the budget comes along, there's quite a lot of irresponsible reporting, isn't there, from the
There
media
is.
generally? And I think what we mean by that is that there's a lot of the scare tactics of those that they're going to do this with pensions, take all your tax-free cash out. I mean, we're seeing pretty reputable newspapers like the Telegraph saying that some financial expert is telling someone to take out all the tax-free cash of their pension. But that's a massive decision, isn't it?
It is, and it's frustrating from our point of view because nobody should really know anyone more than anyone else. And you end up with clients wanting to, almost seek advice of should I do this or should I do that in case they do this. I read the paper said they're going to do that. I need to take action. And it puts us in a very difficult position because we can't give advice for something that isn't actually legislation.
No, and then you've also got the farcical event that we saw that actually the OBR had already announced what the budget was going to be on their website
Yes.
an hour before the Chancellor had the chance to. At times you can't really make it up, can you?
No, a bit embarrassing, wasn't it?
But anyway, let's go back a step actually. So what is the budget? What is the point of the budget?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question because we do hear this from some of our clients. Just what's it all about? Basically, we run a business, so the easiest way to look at it is it's your yearly business plan.
Yeah.
So it's looking at the government needs to look at what they plan to spend that year, the following tax year, what they plan to take in tax receipts, because obviously they need to take enough money in to cover roughly what they're spending. Some really interesting stats though when I looked into it was the budget they plan to take in, or the budget has allowed them to forecast that they'll take in £1.3 trillion next tax year.
Right, okay.
A huge amount of money. Within that, quite interesting, £330 billion will be taken in from income tax receipts.
Right.
I think the next one is VAT. VAT makes up £214 billion of that. So that's over half a trillion pounds taken in just from those two sources. So obviously there's a lot of money to come in from the tax receipts, but equally the government spends money. It costs a lot of money to run Britain. So you're looking at that 1.4 trillion is what they're spending next year or projecting to spend next year.
Yeah.
And within that, that's going to be, I think social welfare is the biggest expense there, about 380 billion. Health, of course, NHS, etc., 277 billion. But going back for a minute, anyone that's any good at maths, 1.4 versus 1.3, there's a bit of a black hole there. Over £100 billion shortfall. And when you look back in the history, the UK has been operating in deficit since 2002. I think 2001 was the last time that there was a surplus.
Right, okay.
Which is incredible.
And it's probably worth explaining, particularly when people watch the news, when they mention that the Chancellor's got to calm the markets. What they mean by that is that if you think about it, if you spend more than you make, well, you need the money to come from somewhere. So what happens? You need to borrow it. So the UK government sells bonds, which are basically just loans to say, give us the money because we can spend it and we will give you the fixed income back. So when they say, who do we owe this to? When people talk about I don't even know exactly how much debt Britain's got. You maybe got some stats on that, Martin.
It's actually £2.9 trillion
£2.9 trillion,
of debt that the UK is in right now.
So yeah, when they say that we're due that money to someone, it is bondholders. And so it can be individuals, other countries, sovereign wealth funds, whatever. That's where all that comes from.
It is. And interestingly, the payment for the interest rate on those loans next year is expected to be about £126 billion. So that shortfall in between is literally like paying the mortgage.
Yeah.
That is Britain paying its own mortgage for borrowing too much money.
Wow. Okay, there you go then.
So
maybe somewhere to start then is what changed or even what stayed the same. And I guess probably some of the big things that stayed the same were the fact that the income tax rates and the national insurance rates are frozen until 2030, 2031. Now, this is known as a stealth tax. So what that actually means is that on paper, the government can say, well, we didn't raise taxes, we just kept the threshold the same. But over the next few years, asset prices are likely to increase. If you look at it for an individuals, I'm sure over the next few years, all of us would like to think, well, I hope I get pay rises every year for the next few years. But if the thresholds all stay the same, that means you're likely to end up paying more tax.
You are, and it's going to push those that are basic rate into higher rates. So those in 3, 4, 5 years' time, you're going to get pay rises, hopefully. you're going to start breaching into the next tax band that you would never have usually gone into if it rise at the same rate as sort of wage inflation.
And you touched on it, didn't you? The fact that income tax makes up probably the largest bit of the receipts. So if the government's going to get you somewhere, income tax is going to be the way.
Yes.
The other part that stayed the same was also inheritance tax threshold. So the current thresholds remain in place the same for 2030, 2031. But again, it's the same idea. The hope for the government is that while asset prices will keep increasing, cash savings, investments, something that someone has got, that should increase over time so that more people will fall into that trap and potentially pay more inheritance tax.
Yes.
So definitely something to monitor. A couple other things I wanted to raise more on personal taxes was the additional 2% that's been added to all rates of tax on savings income. That's going to come in place as of the 6th of April 2027, so something to watch out for savers. On this as well, if you're a property investor, so if you're into property income, things like that, the basic rate for that's going to be 22%, the higher rate's going to be up at 42%, and the additional rate is going to be 47% as of the 6th of April 2027. A little caveat here though, we've not had the Scottish budget yet. Holyrood does of course have devolution, so they are able to look at things and change things. So knowing in Scotland, I don't think that number is going to go down.
No.
It might potentially increase. But kind of
Yes.
across the board, thresholds have either been frozen, so more people will fall into that threshold, or increase slightly.
Yes, and you're right. We need to watch carefully, being in Scotland,
Yes.
that there is going to be those changes that might impact even further
Yeah.
than what they're planned.
So in our world, and it's in the name, those pension guys. So talk to me, Martin. Pensions, what has changed?
So the good news, I guess, being is not as much as the media made out. That there was a lot of people scared that they would cap relief to basic tax relief on pension contributions. They would potentially remove tax-free cash altogether, which obviously was quite scary for a lot of clients. But I'm glad to say that actually probably quite little tweaks and changes in the grand scheme of things. So the main one probably to mention is that there's probably a lot of people out there that's got workplace pensions, they're paying into their schemes, and there's companies out there that manage to look at, not a loophole, but a really good benefit for clients, or their employees, to say, right, if we sacrifice some of your salary, the bit you put into a pension, then technically you don't pay your national insurance on it.
Yeah.
And also the company don't pay national insurance on it. So it was quite a nice little saving. The company saved a lot more than the individual. But usually some companies would enhance the benefits, or they would put their saving into the pension as well. So there was some really quirky ways that people could be boosting their pension without having to pay any extra in. But what's happening here is there's going to be a £2,000 cap. So basically, whatever you're paying into your pension, if it's via salary sacrifice, after the first £2,000 of what you're putting in is deducted for national insurance, after that, you do have to then pay the national insurance on the rest of it. So you're not able to sacrifice as much as what you used to.
It's good to break down the semantics though, isn't it? Because I even had a few questions from clients saying, so does that mean I can only pay £2,000 in a year now via salary sacrifice? If I do anything, am I going to get taxed even more? So we're just talking about the national insurance though, aren't we?
Exactly. So the main relief, which is what you get on income tax, is still there. So absolutely there's no reason to not to be paying into your pension. It just means there's just that little tiny benefit where you used to save a little bit back on national insurance. You'll no longer really get much upside of that. And as an example, when we look at it, let's just say somebody earning £80,000 a year, they get a £10,000 bonus and they put it straight into their pension. That's a huge income tax saving. So there's loads of benefits of doing that. But it used to be that you'd get all the tax, the national insurance relief on that too. But at that rate, you're at the higher end of the national insurance, it's 2%. That is £200. So you got an extra £200 relief of not paying national insurance contributions. Now that's going to be capped on the £2,000 of that instead of the £10,000 of that. If you weren't doing salary sacrifice at all. If you're doing it already, you've probably used up the cap already. But that was the easiest way to explain it is, if you put a 10 grand bonus in at that end of the scale on that pay grade, you used to get £200 relief off the national insurance contribution. Now you're not going to get any if you've already used it elsewhere, or just £40 because you only get it on the first £2,000.
So I suppose what we're saying here is that it's not going to derail anyone's retirement plans, really, isn't it? It's going to allow the government to recoup some of that money back. And I think it's really right what you said, that we had a lot of clients that looked at things, particularly when bonus time comes. Often, particularly where we are in the world, bonus starts to get paid March, April time, the end of the tax year. And if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you could think, if I take all this, I'm actually going to take a 40+% hit. So actually, could I be putting that in my pension when I'm still going to save on the income tax relief? and fund my retirement. So these changes don't really impact that too much, I guess.
No, you're just talking a few percentage points here and there. So absolutely, it doesn't come in until 2029.
Okay.
So you could argue the next few years, let's make sure you're putting in your contributions, maximising the salary sacrifice, because it's gone. Once it's gone in 2029, you've just got that £2,000 limit after that.
Got you.
But yeah, the real message for the story here is still pay into your pension. It's still the right thing to do to fund your retirement. Think about your long-term future. Don't let that derail you, you know, from what the media are saying.
And I suppose expanding on this, because the big thing about when Rachel Reeve last had the red box out, she was doing her budget, was inheritance tax on pensions. I think you and I both had the same, that the farmers kind of stole all the headlines last time, didn't they? I think a lot of people didn't realise that inheritance tax now going to be liable on pensions as of 2027. It sounds as though they're still going to press on with that, doesn't it?
Yes, and that was interesting because that was announced last year's budget. It comes into play April 2027, so still a little bit of time. But, you know, there were some people hopeful that this year's budget, they would say, actually, we've changed our minds.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to see how that would ever happen because it's going to raise a lot of money for the Treasury. And we already know since 2001, they've been operating in a minus. So they will not be getting rid of that, I don't think. But basically, if we go back to last year's budget, that was a huge thing. You know, anyone that's built up pensions, you know, substantial pensions for some people, they always used to sit outside of the estate. So when the time comes to somebody passing away, unfortunately, that whatever was there, it could be £1 million, £2 million for all you know, that always used to sit outside and never be touched from an inheritance tax point of view. 2027, that's coming right into the estate. And that's going to affect a lot of people. I think when we looked at it, we believe that that's going to increase the amount of estates paying inheritance tax by 30% in the UK.
Wow.
Just that one move for including pensions. Like that's huge. That's going to be really impactful.
It was really interesting as well. I'm going to have a slight go here that the guy who's kind of been the quote-unquote genius behind this guy called Torsten Bell, really smarmy politician. Wait till you see him. I'm sure you'll hear about him more. He was on LBC not too long ago talking about it. And his argument was, well, pensions were never meant to be wealth transfer tools. And his other one line, I must admit, I took a bit of umbrage to this when he had said that we're going to stop wealth managers and financial advisors selling pensions as a means to cheat the tax system. I thought, well, it's never been about that. It's about serving people for retirement. So I must admit, I took a little bit of offence to that one.
Yes, and it's a real shame they see it that way because actually that's a huge goal for a lot of our clients. We're actually going to have a podcast on how do you build £1 million pension.
Yeah.
So it's a huge goal for clients to build up a pension, have the flexibility, really enjoy it. You know, pension freedoms came into play because annuities actually didn't serve the right purposes. More people spent money in retirement in the early days than the later days, so they needed more out earlier on.
Yeah.
So it's a real shame that they're hitting the pensioners and of course estates with this tax. And you know, like I say, with a 30% increase, that's huge. You know, I can't remember a budget in the past that has had such a dramatic impact on inheritance tax
Not
before.
from my memory, no.
And what's the real concern, and this we're going to have a separate episode on this as well for the IHT on pensions, is because this is going to introduce double taxation for many, many people with pensions or their family with pensions, where there's going to be, you know, a pension fund that's liable to inheritance tax. The estate has to pay that. But then once it gets into the hand of the beneficiaries, there's then income tax to be paid on taking the money out of the pension.
Yeah.
For double taxation.
Because I remember when this first got tabled, I remember that was the big concerns people had, I think, was, so how does the tax work? Because I take it then, inheritance tax hit and that's it. And then when it was tabled that there's the potential of the double to hit, they thought, wait a minute, you can't do that. But it seems as though that is going to be the way going forward.
Unfortunately so. And that's why, we're dedicating a separate episode just to that subject. You know, it wasn't announced in this budget, it was last budget, and we've got till April 2027, but we need to start planning soon for that.
So the message here is those pension guys have got your back. We've got a plan, but let's dedicate a separate episode to that.
No, absolutely.
So we'll move on then. Let's talk a little bit about things from maybe more of a corporate view or a business owner view. Is there a couple of things you wanted to pick out that you felt was important to update the listeners on?
Yeah, there was. So again, last year's budget was impactful for the pensions. It was impactful for farmers. You know, obviously that did get the headlines last year. But equally for business owners, you know, there's nowhere near the same business relief for if you have a family business that passes on to others. But in this budget, though, the main differences, or the changes, should I say, is the increase in tax that's paid on dividends.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, you'll remember just not too long ago, dividends tax went up and they've gone up again. So right now, as it stands, they're going to be changing as of the 6th of April, the new tax year. And the basic rate dividend tax is going to go up by 2% to 10.75%.
Yeah.
The mid rate will go up by 2% also. So now it will become 35.75. And the additional rate will remain unchanged at 39.35%. But when you really look at that, it's targeting business owners, and it's hard to not be frustrated because that's us.
Yeah.
We are a business owner as well as obviously financial advisors. And you look at that, and if you're running a company, you're paying your taxes, you're paying your employees, paying employee taxes. Now, when you take out dividends as income, so you can take salary or dividend, of course, as a business owner or a blend of both. But if you looked at just a real simple bit of maths, I'm going to stick with the £80,000 that I used earlier.
Yeah.
If you took out £80,000 a year purely just in dividends and you had no other income, that means you're going to be £1,300 worse off in the new financial year. So any business out there that's taken out dividends of any amount is likely to be worse off, unfortunately, because of that. And in that example, that's £1,300 more that you'll be paying in dividend tax.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a real shame because, of course, that money goes, into the government to spend, but that stops us then spending it on the economy and local businesses benefiting from people having more disposable income.
Yeah. It's tricky, isn't it? Because in all fairness, I don't think this is just a Labour thing. You're right. The dividend taxes and things started to increase technically under a Conservative government. So this just seems to be this pattern continuing. And I think we can feel empathy out there because, running a small business, it's been hard going the last few years, been really tricky. And you feel you're kind of getting hit with the stick again. It does get tricky, doesn't it?
It does, and obviously they introduced IR35, that hidden employee, and there was a big crackdown by government where there was maybe a lot of sort of one-man contractors or one-woman contractors, of course, where they looked at that and thought, well, actually, they're making a lot more money and paying a lot less tax than somebody on a salary, so they are trying to get those closer together. But for business owners or investors, it does seem, a hell of a lot more tax that everyone's going to have to be paying within that.
Yeah.
I think the other one was the employee ownership trust.
Yeah.
There's a little change there.
So this is an interesting one. So basically, EOTs came on the scene. I think they've only been a couple of years old. And really, they were for businesses that maybe be quite hard to tangibly sell out in the open market. It could be a family business. It could be into something really rare. There's just not a huge market for, but there is some capital value. And the idea is that the business would eventually be owned by the employees. But obviously, what's the mechanism to do that? So originally, what the plan was, it's kind of like delayed gratification, where you say, okay, I'm not going to take all the money up front. Over a number of years, I will be able to take tax-free money out of the business. So it's basically, they determine the value of whatever the business would be, and it generally gets paid out over 5 years, 10 years, something like that. Now, what was in it for the owner was that technically your exit was tax-free. So you would look at that and think, okay, that's not a bad deal. Basically, the relief's being halved. So you're going to get half the relief. So it'd still be potentially some entrepreneurs leave capital gains tax to pay. So it's maybe just not quite the deal that it was before.
Yeah, so still attractive, but certainly not as attractive as it maybe once was then.
Yeah, and truth being told, that most acquisitions are business sales. I mean, EOTs would make up a very, very small percentage of the market, but something maybe to bear in mind with family businesses or something like that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no, that sounds good. And I guess that the few of the last changes looked at was ISAs. That was a big subject, wasn't it, with clients?
It was, yeah. So when it started, and again, the media is slightly responsible for this, was that, that's it. She's going to get rid of cash ISAs. That's it. There's going to be no relief on it at all. Then eventually it changed to, they'll maybe cut the relief to 20 grand you can put it to a cash ISA. She's going to cut it to 4. Basically what's happened is that there's been a reduction for, and it's the under 65s that this impacts, that traditionally you can put 20 grand per tax year in a cash ISA regardless of who you are. Rachel Reeves has decided that it makes more sense to reduce that to 12,000 for those that are under age 65. But why has she done this? There is a belief in the UK that not enough people invest in the stock market. That's been bad for individuals, but they also argue that it's been bad for the FTSE 100. It's been bad for the UK market because less people are putting money in. And it was interesting. I wanted to get an understanding of where this thinking came from. A couple of different stats on this. So when they polled the American populace, about 62% of Americans participate in the stock market with their savings. So that could either be through investment funds, ETFs, or direct holdings. 62% of the adult population. You compare that to the UK, that number drops to 23%.
Wow.
So if you look at it even for cash ISAs as a subscription, the vast majority of ISAs every year are cash ISAs. And the argument is that, well, if the relief is reduced, more people would put money into the stock market and that would be better all around. But they have appreciated older savers. They like cash ISAs because, well, they're older. They don't have years of time to take equity risk to try and get a return. Will it work? The jury's out, because I suppose in theory, you could say, well, I don't want to invest in the UK stock market. I'm going to use that money and invest in the S&P 500 or whatever. And, you would have the right to do that. No one's stopping you doing that. There was something I saw as well. There was an argument online about, well, technically you could just take out a stocks and shares ISA and invest in a cash instrument. Apparently they are going to be monitoring that. And potentially those instruments won't be for sale in a stocks and shares ISA wrapper anymore. So keep your eyes out on that one, I suppose.
And it puts some more onus on the platforms to then not allow, clients to just open stocks and share, go straight, so it causes issues and it's harder to then police, isn't it? So then it causes potentially more cost for the end user to be in those products.
Well, that's it. And I think there's been a look at ISAs generally across the board. I think genuinely the government likes the stocks and shares ISA wrapper. They can see the value in it and it does help people. LISAs, or lifetime ISAs as they were known, that's something that's been up for debate for a while. For me, it was quite a lazy product. It was brought in a few years ago now, and it was trying to solve two problems: getting young people on the housing ladder and getting people to save for retirement. Two totally different issues that they tried to throw into one wrapper. Truth being told, there wasn't much market uptake from savers or even product providers. I mean, we think about it now being even an independent firm. There was not many providers that had a LISA product, was there?
No, you're right.
So they've looked at it now to think, right, this doesn't make sense. We're scrapping it. There's going to be a white paper written in 2026 to try and analyse, okay, we need to have an ISA product that does help the saver get on the property ladder, but it's not Help to Buy and it's not the lifetime ISA. So kind of watch this space for that one.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, that statistic of, almost 3 times more Americans are investing in stock markets than the UK. And it's funny, some people get annoyed with the budgets and upset about the budgets. Like, I certainly think that's a good thing. I'm not going to lie. Like, my personal opinion is, good, you've reduced the cash ISA, because you should be invested. You should, for the right person, take the right level of risk, but there's so many different levels of risk you can take. And I personally think that will benefit the person as long as it's taking the right level of risk and the right funds, not too exposed to something silly that's going to, half in value overnight. That's the scary bit. But, does that mean that the UK investors end up with more money, which they then go and spend, and it boosts the economy and makes them happier? It's a good thing.
You're right. And I think it's a cultural bias. I think if you speak to the average American, they believe the stock market's for everyone. Yeah, it's a case of, it is a wealth building tool, and it kind of goes back to the American dream, isn't it, to build wealth? And they're okay saying that.
Yeah.
I think that to them is a good American story, a good success outcome. In Britain, perhaps we're maybe a bit more scared of these things. Stock market, that's not for me. But I definitely have the American opinion. It is for everyone, and I can tell you firsthand, investing savings in the stock market can change your life and can change your family's life for the better. But you're right. It's taking that right attitude and level of risk. But let's hope that actually this does provide a good investment outcome.
Totally.
In the future.
And on the subject of investing, the other relief that was actually cut, unfortunately, is if you invest into VCTs, so venture capital trusts. So usually these are younger businesses, potentially more exposed to risk. So usually high risk investors find themselves in these portfolios. Yeah. So typically, if, as an advisor, the rule of thumb usually is: have you filled up your ISA? Have you filled up your pension? Once you've used up those allowances, used all the reliefs, okay, well, actually, you could go into a VCT. You could invest in these more sort of startup or younger companies. And the reliefs were 30%. So, if you put 100 grand into these types of companies, you got £30,000 off your tax bill if you were due that much tax in the first place.
Yeah.
Really attractive, a good way to boost companies, those younger companies. That's now been reduced to 20% relief. So instead of getting 30, now you only get the 20% relief.
And I suppose, truth being told, that the tax tail always wagged the dog with these products, didn't it? That you were doing it for the tax relief, really, weren't you? That some of the companies might have turned out great, some of them not so much. I mean, it was always a mixed basket you were put in, but basically, if you got your tax back, that was kind of the end result,
Kind of made
really,
up
wasn't
for it. Yeah.
Well then, so a little bit of relief cut on that.
Mm-hmm.
And really, is there any more, Martin, that you think really key bits that maybe we missed out on the budget or anything? Because listen, loads of things change in the budget. What we wanted to do is try and bring it back more to personal finances and things that would impact maybe a small business owner or pensions or things like that. But
That's exactly it. Everyone's going to be impacted slightly differently,
Yeah.
but on the grand scheme, I think it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. There's still, that stealth tax, a big one. That's the
Yeah.
real hidden agenda here of actually everyone's going to end up paying a lot more tax over the next few years, but it doesn't look like it because the reliefs are all staying, or the bans are all staying the same, unfortunately.
Well, there we go. But the one bit I would like to leave our listeners with, and it's actually from an American financial advisor, a guy called Dave Ramsey. He's a real sort of Southern guy, Southern twang. He's got some good rants on Facebook and things like that. If you haven't seen it, look for Dave Ramsey. You'll find an interesting post. But it's a few years ago, he's talked about the US budget deficit. Loads of people are getting really panicky about it and should I pull money at the stock market and all these kind of things. And he said, reality of it is, guys, you can't control the budget deficit in the government. But what's the budget deficit like in your house? What's the budget like in your home? That's the bit that you can control. So if you manage your personal finances as well you can, you're doing a good job. There are certain things in the world that are out with your control, particularly what the government spends its money on, but all you can do is do your best at home. And that's where having a good relationship with your financial advisor, your accountant, etc., can pay massive benefits.
Totally agree.
So thank you for joining us. Obviously, if there's any questions or anything you want to pick up post listening to this, you can get us on welshandtaylorwealth.co.uk, and we will see you very soon for another episode. Take care.